Zimbabwean strongman Robert Mugabe remains under house arrest amid speculation that his sacked deputy Emmerson Mnangagwa is poised to take over as head of government. The powerful 55-year-old First Lady that could have led Robert Mugabe to his downfall like the biblical Delilah. South African President Jacob Zuma to send a peace envoy to Zimbabwe after speaking to the besieged Robert Mugabe. And tonight we are asking, could Mugabe's fate signal the beginning of the end for Africa's pre-independence generation? We'll dig in. Well, and to help me dig in that last part of our highlight tonight are three individuals. We have Alex Magaisa, who is a former advisor to former Zimbabwean Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai. We also have Mark Bichachi, who is a political analyst, as well as Mr. Abelo Yeyo, a researcher at the Center for African Progress. And naturally, on our Twitter poll tonight, we are asking you, do you support the Zimbabwe military action to seize power from Robert Mugabe? Do you support the Zimbabwe military action to seize power from Robert Mugabe? You've seen that development in Harare and the outskirts of that city. And the question is, could Mugabe's fate signal the beginning of the end for Africa's pre-independence generation? We'd like to hear your comment on this very topic. Our Twitter handle is at KTN News. You can as well tweet me at Yusuf Ibra. Remember, our hashtag is Bottomline Africa. And I'm going to read some of your comments within the program. Now, top on our news tonight, and we want to begin with the fast developing event in Zimbabwe, where the country's military has placed President Robert Mugabe under house arrest in the capital Harare after they seized state television and said they were targeting quote-unquote criminals. Now, the move is seen by analysts as a bid to replace Mugabe with his sacked deputy, Emmerson Mnangagwa. Mugabe's top political allies were arrested by the military last night and today morning after it took control of the country. Those who have been arrested so far include Finance and Economic Development Minister Ignatius Chombo, Police Commissioner General Augustine Chiuri, Local Government Minister Sevia Kasukuwere, who is also ZANU-PF's National Political Commissar, as well as Mugabe's Internal Security Director, Albert Ngulube. Sources say Mugabe is negotiating a safe exit for his wife, Grace, to Namibia.
To me, it was a surprise. It was an overnight coup which has taken place through the military. And us as Zimbabweans, we had thought we were going to have a free and fair election next year. But overnight, we have seen that the army has taken over. But we look forward that maybe it is going to be a short thing. Then the people of Zimbabwe should decide for themselves which party to lead them.
Now still on Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is under the control of the military. 2 days after its army chief warned President Robert Mugabe against purging the ruling party's senior ranks, senior army officer and Zimbabwe Defense Forces spokesperson Major General S.B. Moyo assured that President Robert Mugabe and his family are safe and denied staging a coup in an address after seizing control of the state broadcaster ZBC.
We wish to assure the nation that His Excellency the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade R.G. Mugabe, and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed. We are only targeting criminals around him who are committing crimes that are causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice. As soon as we have accomplished our mission, we expect that the situation will return to normalcy. To the judiciary, the measures underway are intended to ensure that, as an independent arm of the state, you are able to exercise your independent authority.
Well, let me now give you a quick preview of what Mugabe's kitchen cabinet looks like. And we begin with Grace Mugabe, the wife to the 93-year-old president. And Mugabe's 52-year-old wife rose from political obscurity to the top ranks of the ruling ZANU-PF party and is now a front runner to succeed her husband. And next in line is Jonathan Moyo, a slick propagandist of Robert Mugabe's government and former information minister. Moyo was G40's brains and mouthpiece who never shied away from controversy. And then we have Sevia Kasukuere, who is a former ZANU-PF youth minister, nicknamed Tyson. He ran Mugabe's attempt to indigenize the economy, essentially forcing foreign investors to surrender large stakes in their businesses to locals. And then we have Ignatius Chombo. He's a former university lecturer and Mugabe's homeboy. Apparently they come from the same area. Chombo was promoted in an October cabinet reshuffle from the Interior Ministry to the Finance Portfolio. Basically, has been holding two very senior positions there in Mugabe's government. Then there's Augustine Chihuri. He is a Commissioner General of the Police. Chihuri was accused of, as a commissioner, he was accused by rights group of presiding over vicious crackdowns on dissent and popular protests in the last 18 months in Zimbabwe. And then last but not the least, we have Kuzai Chipanga. He's a very youthful guy, a 35-year-old youth leader. He ingratiated himself to Mugabe and Grace and organized nationwide youth rallies that Grace Mugabe used to attack Mnangagwa and his allies. Of course, Mnangagwa is the deputy president who got fired, was it last week, by Robert Mugabe. And still, in Zimbabwe, a spokesperson for Zimbabwe's opposition movement for democratic change says that the government of President Robert Mugabe had always been, quote-unquote, unsustainable and an accident waiting to happen after the country's military seized power. Now, MDC spokesperson Obert Gutu said his party had been making this case for years and said he hoped the situation will remain peaceful in Zimbabwe. Take a look.
This country has always been very volatile. We have always been on record to say that ZANU-PF was always an accident waiting to happen. Over the years, we have been issuing out statements. We have been, telling our supporters and telling, in fact, Zimbabweans in general, telling the entire world, everyone who cared to listen, to say, look, this is an unsustainable system. The political repression of the Mugabe regime was not sustainable. This is why we say that ZANU-PF, in the form that it was always going to be an accident waiting to happen. Of course, in the history of Southern Africa, it is not very often that you have a military involvement of this nature. But of course, it has happened in other countries. It has happened in countries like Lesotho, for instance. But for Zimbabwe, obviously, this is a first. But we are saying that, look, to the extent that there's peace out there, we haven't heard of any looting, we haven't heard of any bloodshed, we haven't heard of any, people being, murdered, people being killed. Would be happy if the situation remains calm like this. Would be happy to say whatever is going to happen, let us respect human life.
Now, veterans of Zimbabwe's independence war say President Robert Mugabe should be recalled from his role as president and leader of the ruling ZANU-PF party. The veterans back former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who was sacked last week, one of several dismissals that led to recent crisis, which has seen now the military take control of that country.
That the revolutionaries can only...
We urge that as the Central Committee reconvenes, it should quickly embrace and institutionalize the idea of the War Veterans League as a fourth wing of the Revolutionary Party. We urge that Robert Gabriel Mugabe should be recalled from his role as the President and First Secretary of ZANU-PF. We also want to facilitate good and proper running of political parties in the forthcoming elections.
Now, in neighboring South Africa, President Jacob Zuma has called for calm in Zimbabwe, saying he will send an envoy to Harare. Zuma says he had spoken to Robert Mugabe on phone, and the besieged Zimbabwean leader assured Zuma that he was fine.
I've taken a decision to send an envoy to be able to conduct the leaders of the Defense Force who have undertaken these operations, but also to meet with President Mugabe so that we have a more clear picture of what is happening in Zimbabwe. I will also be sending an envoy to His Excellency President of Angola to brief him as the chairperson of the organ of SADC on peace and security.
Now, naturally, you'll want to know what Grace Mugabe is all about and the position she's been holding in the government of Robert Mugabe, that is her husband, and she's been, tipped to succeed him. Now, a philosopher once said that the death that will finally kill a man definitely begins as an appetite, and this phrase has been used to describe Grace Mugabe, Zimbabwe's first lady, who is partly being blamed for the fate of one of Africa's great heroes of struggle, Robert Mugabe. Now, here's the look at the life of Grace Mugabe, who has been likened to Delilah of the Bible.
That man is irreplaceable. That's the truth, whether we like it or not. Whoever is engaging in factionalism must stop. Forthwith. Stop it.
Vane say, as the citizen of this country, I know President says, no, I don't want to impose any candidate. But I've always argued with him that you have the role, you have the right to be part of that process because we respect him. Saka, his word will be final. Mark my words, his word will be final.
Of course, with the development in Zimbabwe there, naturally the European countries also concerned. Now, the European Union has in the meantime called for dialogue in Zimbabwe and a peaceful resolution to the crisis that erupted there overnight as the military seized power. Separately, Britain Prime Minister Theresa May called on all sides to show restraint in Zimbabwe and said the situation in the country remain fluid.
Next week will mark 6 months since the tragic attack at the Manchester.
Indeed, we have seen the recent developments and the spillover, including in relation to the country's security forces. It is a matter of concern for the EU. We are following very closely what is happening on the ground, underlining that the fundamental rights of all the citizens need to be respected and the constitutional order and democratic governance to be upheld.
What has been taking place in Harare, we are monitoring those developments very carefully. The situation is still fluid, and we would urge restraint on all sides because we want to see and we would call for an avoidance of violence. Of course, our primary concern is the safety of British nationals in Zimbabwe, and that are obviously in an uncertain political situation. We do see reports of unusual military activity, so we would recommend British nationals in Harare to remain safely at home until the situation becomes clearer.
Well, and that briefing there by the UK's Prime Minister Theresa May, she made a comment, of course, about Zimbabwe. It takes us to a very short break. But when we return, we'll have the discussion, or our studio discussion, which, of course, will focus on the situation in Zimbabwe. We have in studio already Alex Magaisa. Of course, Alex is going to join me via Skype from the United Kingdom. He's a former advisor to former Zimbabwean Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai. We also have in studio Mr. Abel Oyeyo, a researcher at the Center for African Progress, as well as Mark Bichachi, a political analyst. Once again, on our Twitter poll, we did ask you, do you support the Zimbabwe's military action to seize power from Robert Mugabe? Do you support the Zimbabwe military action to seize power from Robert Mugabe? And could this perhaps signal the end for Africa's pre-independence generation? We'd like to hear your feedback on that. Of course, this is Bottomline Africa. We're going to take a very short break. We'll be returning very shortly.